What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo, and today I'm going to be bringing to you my Brillant ABC deck profile with no traps that I piloted at YCS Anaheim. I ended up going X3 after round 8, so I almost made day 2, which was pretty cool, but nonetheless, I still had a really awesome time, and I thought I'd share with you what I was playing because it's kind of a very interesting take on ABC, and it's pretty cool. It performed pretty well. I can't really complain. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. So to start off, we have 3 copies of A, 3 copies of B, and 3 copies of C. This pretty much needs no explanation. If you're playing ABC, for the most part, you're always going to want to play, max out on the copies of these cards. Unless you're Elvis Vu and win the whole thing, then you only need 2 Cs, but I still like the 3rd C because it can come up in some situations that it's pretty good. I didn't really see an instance where I didn't want to have multiples of these cards. So we're going to get these all out of the way here. Next up, we have 2 copies of Gold Gadget and 2 copies of Silver Gadget. This I'm still questioning if this was the right call. Part of me feels like I wanted to play either a third of each gadget or 2 copies of Photon Thrasher, because when you combine the 4 gadgets as well as the 3 copies of Brilliant Fusion, we have a lot of different ways to pretty much go into our combos and ensure that, we start with a turn 1 Buster. But for the most part, every time I saw a Union Hanger or a Terraforming, I saw a gadget, so pretty much it accomplished my goal. But I did see times where I saw a gadget but didn't see Union Hanger. So I feel like for the most part this was the correct number of gadgets. And I don't think it really... further testing might prove otherwise, but for the most part for the event it did what I wanted it to do. And then since we are playing the Brilliant engine, we are playing the 1 Trick Clown and the 1 Gem Knight Garnet. This is pretty standard because, when you use Brilliant Fusion, you're going to send that off, and you obviously need this to use the Brilliant Fusion. I am playing Desires, and playing 1 Garnet might be a little bit risky, and there were times where I did draw the Garnet and Brilliant Fusion in the hand, but those times where I drew both, the rest of my hand wasn't enough to really push me forward to pretty much win the game, because you needed to have, Union Hanger and a gadget to pretty much still open your normal combo. And so the fact that I would have had a second Garnet in deck made no difference. If I played higher than 40 cards, I would probably consider playing the second Garnet, but for the most part, it did exactly what I needed it to do. So that's it for the monsters. Moving on to the spells, we have 3 copies of Union Hanger, and then we have 3 copies of Terraforming to obviously supplement that. And then we also have 3 copies of Brilliant Fusion. Now this is important because the reason why we felt that Brilliant Fusion is the best build is because Brilliant Fusion pretty much acts as like a 7th, 8th, and 9th copy of Union Hanger. Mainly because if you open Brilliant Fusion and it's 2 letters, you can still get yourself to a ABC Dragon Buster turn 1, because you're going to have your Trick Clown, and then you summon 1 letter, and then you're going to have a B. You equip the B to the letter, and then you can make your Tsukiyomi play, grab your extra letter, and all that. So Brilliant Fusion is very, very vital. It also provides for some insane combos where you can actually end a turn 1 board with a Buster with a letter equipped like A. And a lot of decks like Metal Foes or Burning Abyss actually don't have a main deck out to something like that. And then later on in games 2 and 3, when they side system down against you, you can actually equip a B to your Buster, and then that way they can't system down your Buster, which is really, really strong, since that's their main means of, dealing with the Buster. So we're just going to go ahead and get these out of the way here. Next up, we have, obviously, 3 copies of Pot of Desires, which is, still, in my opinion, the best card in the game. You should be running 3 because there's no reason not to. The only thing that sucks with this card is if you banish, multiples of your combo pieces. But for the most part, Desires is a +1, and there's really no reason you shouldn't be running 3 of it. Next, we have 3 copies of Twin Twisters. This was a really good meta call because we had a feeling there was going to be a lot of Paleozoic, but what also is interesting about Twin Twister is that it also acts as a combo piece for your main starters, because if you open like a letter with another letter equipped, but you don't open your gadget, you can actually Twin Twister a C to summon your other letter in hand, and then that way you can actually get to a Buster. So even though you're negging yourself to get to Buster, Buster's still very important because it's basically your best card in your entire deck for the most part. So on top of, the spell and trap removal, that's very important, it also acts as a main combo piece to get you to the Buster. So that was why we decided to play 3. Next up, we played 3 copies of Forbidden Chalice. Now, this is really interesting. I mentioned in the beginning of the video that we decided to go the route of 0 traps. Well, actually, there's 1 trap, and you'll see that later. But the reason we decided to go this route is because One of the biggest issues with the deck is if you go first, your traps are amazing, but if you go second, your traps are utterly horrible. So the idea was we wanted to play cards that essentially fulfill the role of a trap card, but they're also very good going second, that if we're going up against a very crazy board that we need to break, we have the outs to do so. And so Chalice provided us with pretty much the happy middle ground for that. So for instance, if we draw this in our opening hand with Buster, we can just simply set it, just like we would Dimensional Barrier or anything like that. And it's pretty good because people aren't going to be playing around Chalice because they don't know we're fucking playing it. And then in addition to that, if we're going second, if we're going up against like a Tree Toad or a Buster or anything like that, we can immediately Chalice it, and then they're forced to tag out or they're forced to tribute, which then allows us to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And pretty much make our board, and then they have to pretty much break our board. So it's really good. Chalice came in so clutch. No one was expecting that we were playing it. It was so sick. Next up, we have 2 copies of Instant Fusion. I know these are mismatching. I couldn't find 2 that did match, but Instant Fusion is really strong because it raises the ceiling of this deck tremendously. It allows you to just have like a Buster, and then, you have your Tsukiyomi, but then you can also make something like Karen Gorgon or Rafflesia to back it up, and having something like that's really strong. It's also good, too, because it helps you bait out like other cards like Strike and such, because then that way, if they strike your gadget, then you can just Instant Fusion and continue with your plays like that. So that was really important. I think 2 is the perfect number as well. 3 would have been too many. Then we played 2 copies of Book of Eclipse. This follows the same role as Forbidden Chalice, essentially, as a good defensive and offensive card, and it was really strong. Plenty of times where you're flipping over whole boards, and then you can just pretty much take control of the board from that point. So that was a really strong card. 1 main deck Regeki. This was mainly for going second. It's such a strong card if you open it and they have like a ridiculously good board, but if they have a very weak board, Regeki will just completely destroy it, and then you can just go off from there. So this was a last second addition in the main deck, but it was really paid off. Then we got 1 Upstart Goblin to play 39, and then finally 1 Treacherous Trap Hole. So this was really cool with Instant Fusion because we were playing no traps. Everyone's expecting, we're playing Dimensional Barrier, Solemn Strike. If we ever made Rafflesia, no one was ever expecting that we were going to drop a Treacherous on them. And a lot of times, Dennis and I would notice that a lot of boards just have like 2 monsters on the board. So if you go Instant Fusion into a Rafflesia, they're just not going to understand why you did that. And then you drop Treacherous and kill both of their monsters, and now you can continue with your play. So we kind of coined it the offensive Rafflesia Treacherous Trap Hole play. So that was pretty cool. So that's it for the main deck. It's 40 cards, pretty tight, but it actually ended up working really well. For the extra deck, moving on here, we have 3 copies of Buster, obviously, because it's pretty much, the best card in the deck. I only got hit by cherries once, thank God, but for the most part, Buster did what it needed to do. And then we supplement that with our other fusions, 1 Elder Entity Norden and Seraphonite, because, we're playing Brilliant and Instant Fusion. And then moving on to the rest of the deck, it's pretty much all the standard stuff. Abyss Dweller, Tsukiyomi, Karen Gorgon's interesting. This is really cool because if you get it online and they have a Buster out, it immediately shuts their Buster off, because then you can redirect the Buster to any of their cards, so that's pretty important. 1 Castel, because it's Castel. We got Daigusto Emerald, we've got Diamond Dyer, Gigant, and then we have the Utopia package as well. And then we also had the Rafflesia for the offensive Rafflesia play, or you could use it defensively as well, like we were saying. But all of these cards were very vital. Karen Gorgon only came up once, so honestly, that could probably be the most cuttable slot. But everything else came up, not every single game, but it came up probably every single match at some point. So that's it for the extra deck. Moving on to the side. The side was actually really interesting. So we have 2 copies of Gamma Seal. Totally Awesome is a bitch, and this is pretty much the best way to out it. Especially if they have 2 of them, like Gamma Seal is just your best friend by just dropping it on them. But for the most part, that's the only reason we would play this deck. This or against Dark Law, I guess. But so Totally Awesome Heroes is pretty much what these were for. They came in really clutch, too. Then we have 2 copies of Max C. This pretty much just came in solely for anytime we wanted to go second. We really didn't want to play this in the main deck, because if we go first, this doesn't contribute anything to our turn 1 play, and actually kind of gives us 1 less card to work with. So we felt that when we know we're going second, it's very strong, especially against decks like Water or Totally Awesome Heroes or anything like that. Anytime we were going second against a deck that we thought it was strong, that's when we sided it in. And then to round out the monsters, we have 1 copy of Psycho Reader. Psycho Reader is really good because it pretty much, not only is it searchable by Gigant, but in the ABC mirror, it's incredibly strong. There was one time where my opponent just had an A and a C engrave, and I banished both of those, and he ended up having 3 busters, and because he Pot of Desire twice, he actually lost most of his other pieces, so that really hurt, and prevented him from making a buster for like 2 to 3 turns, so that was really, really good. Then moving on to the spells, we have 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. Ironically, Cosmic Cyclone was actually for Metal Foes because it's so good being able to banish Pendulum Scales, being able to banish Metal Foes Fusion or Full Metal Foes Fusion or any of their traps. But the irony was I didn't play a single Metal Foes all day. The only time I really sided this in was when I didn't really feel like I needed Twin Twister or I needed extra spell and trap hate against something like Yosenju that plays a lot of back row. And also, I guess too, if I played Paleozoic, which I did not play any of that either, that also would have been an instance where Cosmic Cyclone would have been very strong. Then we got 3 copies of System Down. This is obviously for the ABC mirror. This is basically like 3 copies of Regeki / I just won the fucking game, because typically if you system down your opponent in the ABC mirror, you're pretty much going to win, so there's really no reason not to play 3 copies of this. You can maybe cut 1, but this card was just so good in every single ABC. I think in every ABC mirror I played, which I played 4 of them, I saw this card at least once in those mirrors, so that was really, really strong. Then we have 1 copy of Dark Hole. This is to supplement the Regeki, going against something like Metal Foes or things like that when they create some of their giant boards. Dark Hole is just a really good board wipe, and it came up a lot where it was very useful. 1 Pot of Acquisitiveness. I fucking hated this card. This card was like, I just feel like this was something else. Like, this could have been like anything else but this card, because I only got cherries once the entire weekend, and it was just so lackluster. Like, the time I did get cherries, I actually won the game just by beating down my opponent with a Assault Core and like a Utopia the Lightning or something. So like, I didn't even need the Acquisitiveness, so I just wish I would have played a different card instead. It's like, it's not worth playing this 1 card for something that they're going to play 3 of and more than likely be able to out your buster in the first place. I used it once to cycle when I had my 3 ABC pieces in the Banish Zone, but it didn't even draw me anything I needed. It was just kind of because I could cycle it, I did. I was in such a winning position that it didn't even matter at that point. So ultimately, I was not happy with the card. And then last but not least, we have 2 copies of Anti-Spell. This was for, obviously, Metal Foes, but like I said, I didn't end up playing any. What actually ended up happening was I started siding this going first against ABC, which I wasn't planning on doing, but it was just like destroying ABC left and right every time I did go first in game 2 or game 3. So I just started siding it in. It was only 2 copies, so I figured if I draw it, I draw it. If I don't, I don't. But it put in a lot of work, even though, like I said, I didn't play against any Metal Foes. So ultimately, like, that Pot of Acquisitiveness could have just been a 3rd anti-spell, and it probably would have been a much better decision in the long run. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for the deck profile. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the no trap version of ABC, if you like it at all. Be sure to like the video as always. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content, and back me on Patreon, because just by pledging $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to make amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thank you guys so much again. We'll see you next time.